The database, this all singing, all dancing database that has held up this legislation for the past, 6 years, is it? It held it up, is called the Clinical Trial Information System. So it is the new database which has been implemented to allow us to implement the clinical trials regulation in the EU. Now, obviously, it does not apply in the UK because we have now left the EU. But if you have any clinical trial sites in the EU, you will need to use this system. So it is now live, and the clinical trials regulation is now in its implementation phase. There is a transition period. I haven't put a slide in about it, but just in case you're not aware, the transition period, the first step of it goes up to the 31st of January next year, so 2023. And anything up to that point, you have a choice whether to put it under the new regulation, go through Ctis, or whether to go under the old system through UDRACT under the Clinical Trials Directive. So even for new trials, up to the end of January next year, you can still put them under the old legislation. From the 31st of January next year, so 2023, anything new will have to go through Ctis. So for new trials, the transition period is 1 year. And then you have to move over. The caveat on that is that if your trial is going to go on beyond 2025, so for 31st of January 2025, then it'll have to go under Ctis. So January 2025 is the absolute cutoff where everything will need to be under the new system. But for new trials, for the first year, provided they're going to finish before then, you can still put them under the old system, or you can choose to put them under the new system. For ongoing clinical trials, you can keep them under the directive, so under UDRACT, until January 2025. You can move them across if you want to, but there's no requirement to. So ongoing trials, the deadline is January 2025. For new trials, it's 2023, provided they'll be finished by 2025. So I hope that's clear, but it's on all the websites anyway. So the Clinical Trials Information System is where everything is going to go in terms of applications and reports for clinical trials, apart from the SUSAR reports, which will still go into EudraVigilance. Everything else will go into the Clinical Trials Information System. There is loads and loads of information about this on the EMA website. So there's a sponsor handbook, there's reference materials to support that, there are online training materials. They did run a master training program. That's not a master trainer program where you can train at one person in your organization that then kind of can train everyone else within the organization. I don't think that's running anymore, but I'm kind of hoping they will run it again at some point. And there's also a newsletter called Ctis Highlights that you can sign up for as well. It's, they've got this all singing, all dancing database, but if you want to get this newsletter, you still have to send an email to a person to ask to be put on the mailing list for it. There's no online sign up. Anyway, there we go. So that's the kind of overview. Just in terms of how it's structured, for the sponsor account, the sponsor has to register for an account, and the people on this who are working for the sponsor who are going to be using the system have to have an EMA registration account. A lot of people have got those already for other things, so like for EudraVigilance and that kind of thing. So they might already have an account, but if not, they need to set one up. And then the sponsor can register as an organisation for their clinical trial program, and that will then allow them to submit all their clinical trials to the system. You need to nominate sponsor admin people, and you'll need at least 2 of those. There's loads more detail around what those roles are and what they can do, and how that works on the EMA website. I'm not going to go into detail, but it is all there. And then in terms of the roles within the system, so as a sponsor, there's obviously the admin roles, but then there are also 3 other types of roles. So there's viewer, preparer, and submitter. And I think they're fairly self-explanatory as to what those roles are. So the viewer can only see information, they can't change anything. The preparer can prepare documents and put information in, but can't submit. And then the submitter will kind of, I guess, be like an approval role where they can actually submit the information to the system. And those are all roles within the sponsor account. So that's for a sponsor organisation where you're going to be doing lots of clinical trials and submitting all of those in the system. There is also an option for a clinical trial administrator account, which is trial specific. So if, for example, you were a non-commercial organisation and you were just doing one clinical trial, then somebody from that organisation could register as a clinical trial administrator. And I think my kind of understanding with that role is that you can only submit for that one trial. So it's specific to that one clinical trial. So those are the different roles that are available within the system. And then there's also this thing called personas, which I think is just like a tool to help you decide what user roles need to be assigned to different people within the organization. So it really kind of describes it in terms of job function categories. So you might have a regulatory project manager, for example, who would be a preparer and probably a submitter. So it kind of looks at the different job functions that people are doing and then suggests user roles based on those sort of personas, they've called them. So the personas are not the roles within the system as such, it's just a tool to help you decide on those user roles. So that's a little bit of information about the clinical trial information system. We're gonna stop the recording now.